Yes, as Christine said, I'm the Pro Bono and Public Service Director here at the law school. And as part of the Public Interest Center, I help students find meaningful volunteer opportunities, also organize pro bono and public service events, along with collaborating with our community justice organizations to help increase access to justice. So I am thrilled to be here today to introduce our speakers on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, serving the public good from clinical practice to law firm pro bono. Our first speaker is going to be Cary Shepherd, and he is the Montgomery Foundation Environmental Law Fellow at our own Bluhm Legal Clinic. His work focuses on areas of environmental advocacy, including climate change, air pollution, energy law, and environmental legislation. Prior to joining the clinic, Cary served as policy director at the Illinois Environmental Council, where he focused on state legislation and administrative law in Illinois. Before practicing law, he held a number of positions, including teaching a class on LSAT, serving as a fellow in the Chicago mayor's office, and also working as a field organizer for President Obama's re-election campaign. He's a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School, and he got his BA in history at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. Our second speaker is Steven Schulman, who's a 1994 graduate of the law school, and he has been the pro bono partner at Akin Gump since 2006. He leads the firm's worldwide pro bono practice, and his own personal practice focuses on human rights and refugee matters. Steven has served 2 terms as president of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel. We are really thrilled to have you both here today. So thank you, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here with Maureen and Steve today. This is a really cool conversation, and I appreciate the Northwestern team for setting up this really important topic. I think that Maureen did an excellent job with my background there, so I won't add a bit more, but just I'm the legal fellow, Montgomery Legal Fellow at the Bluhm Clinic, and I'll turn it over to Steve to introduce himself as well.
Great, thanks, Cary. And I also, it's really a thrill to be, well, here or there, but to be speaking to Northwestern. I noted that in the audience was my dear old friend, Len Rosenberg. I want to tell you, Len, I'm not talking about Fernando Tatis's contract, so I'm not sure why you're on this call, but I appreciate your attendance. So as Maureen mentioned, I'm the pro bono partner at Akin Gump. I graduated Northwestern in 1994 and had frankly no idea that that would be my title at any point in my legal career. While I was active in the clinic, I worked with folks on the disability side of the clinic and educational equity. Got my first experiences doing IEP hearings in against Oak Park River Forest High School. But I went right to Latham & Watkins after graduation in 1994 and did not take my first significant pro bono case until 1998, an asylum case that I'll talk about in a little bit. After practicing white-collar criminal and antitrust law at Latham and then leading their pro bono practice from 2001 to 2004, I then joined Akin Gump and have led our worldwide pro bono practice since 2006, becoming the first full-time pro bono partner at the firm. So what Cary and I wanted to talk to you all about today was really the state of pro bono and legal aid, both kind of before the pandemic to set the table a little bit, and then talk about how the pandemic has affected many areas, and also touch on some of the racial justice areas that we've seen in the last year. As I mentioned, I graduated law school in 1994, and pro bono at law firms was very different back then. In fact, I'm going to share with you here a chart. As you see, 1994, the law firm's average, actually that's less than 1 million hours of pro bono were reported to the American lawyer. Last year, that number had grown to more than 5 million hours. You see a spike there in the middle during the recession, during the Great Recession, when there was a lot of capacity, a lot of excess capacity at law firms. And those of us who were running pro bono practices then, in fact, made the point to our leaders that we should increase our pro bono commitment both because of the need and because of our capacity. But we've been able to maintain right around or in excess of 5 million hours per year. So for those of you who are currently law students, you should know that you are entering a profession that has changed radically in the last quarter century to really make a significant commitment to legal aid. Just similar numbers here in terms of the number of firms performing different benchmarks of pro bono. Last year in 2019, the last year we have the data for, more than 50 firms averaged at least 60 hours of pro bono per lawyer, and 17 firms averaged at least 100 hours per lawyer. So really a significant commitment all up and down the big law area. Within big law, though, we focus on a number of different areas. One of the chief areas that big law firms tend to focus on, and not entirely coincidental, is immigration. And in some ways, the story of pro bono immigration is the story of my pro bono career. As I mentioned, my first significant pro bono case was in 1998. I represented a pro-democracy activist from Nigeria who had been jailed and tortured back in his home country, made it to the United States, was denied asylum at the asylum office, and I volunteered to take on the trial at that point. I will be honest, I was more interested in getting trial experience than necessarily doing pro bono at the time, but having that experience really changed my life. And I've been working on asylum cases for all 23 years since then. As you might guess, the outcome of that case was we won asylum for our client. He and his wife and his 5 children are all now U.S. citizens and very successful here in the D.C. area. From there, I started to supervise more asylum cases and realized that I could really build a pro bono practice out of that. That is not, in fact, very unusual because the Legal Services Corporation, which is the leading funder of legal aid in the United States, does not allow, because a congressional mandate does not allow its grantees to represent undocumented immigrants. Asylum has become one of the leading areas of pro bono in the United States. And that is reflected in both in individual cases and in bigger projects, like, for example, the firm Jones Day has opened up a clinic in Laredo, Texas during the what's called MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocol, where there are tent courts set up there to represent asylum seekers who are stuck on the other side of the border by the old Trump administration policy. So you see firms not just taking on individual cases, but really taking on holistic representation. And of course, you've seen many firms in the last 4 years challenging many of the Trump administration's immigration policies through litigation, partnering with organizations like the ACLU and other national organizations. Law firms have also focused for many years on housing, Social Security disability, family law, what we would kind of generally call poverty law type of matters. Those are matters that the Legal Services Corporation does work on, and there's a great opportunity for you to do work in that area. Domestic violence is another area that law firms have focused on, and it's one where there is a gaping need. As you may know, there is no guarantee of a lawyer in civil proceedings, and that includes domestic violence. In many states, including here in the District of Columbia, more than 90% of women seeking protective orders go unrepresented. So there is a great need for pro bono in there. And I'm going to come back to that as an example of some lessons learned during the pandemic. Law firms, as we have grown internationally, have also grown our pro bono practices internationally. I'm on the board of something called the International Senior Lawyers Project. That project is intended to leverage the commercial law expertise of major law firms and lawyers nearing or at retirement to help developing countries deal with significant issues like infrastructure development, tax policy. So, for example, years ago, we helped the government of Liberia negotiate a palm oil concession with a major energy company. That is one where, for example, the government of Liberia had no capacity to either really understand the technical requirements for negotiating a large energy deal, nor could they afford sophisticated counsel. And so you see law firms jumping into those areas as well. We also leverage our expertise in things like entity representation. So in other words, representing nonprofit entities. Our largest pro bono client at Akin Gump, for example, is the KIPP Charter School. KIPP, as some of you may be familiar with it, is the largest nonprofit charter school organization in the country. They have a number of schools in the Chicagoland area. And they educate low-income kids, 90% of whom qualify for low cost or free lunch. 90% of whom are students of color, and 90% of whom actually go on to college, but the vast majority of whom are first-generation college students. So it's an interesting representation there that we undertake to work with KIPP on its very sophisticated legal matters. We've done mergers for KIPP. As they've grown across the country, they've realized that some of their legal structures were not suited to the size of the organization. We have done bond offerings for them, helping negotiate with the state of California to get financing to build schools. We've helped on labor and employment issues as well. So one of the exciting things you can do at a law firm is use your very specific commercial law expertise to help the public interest. And then, of course, being here in Washington, our firm is very involved in policy work. And so we have lobbied on Capitol Hill for immigration reform. We've worked with health charities to get financing for the National Institutes of Health to study things like rare brain and rare childhood cancers. And so again, the thing I want you to take out of this is that we both work on the most acute needs in our communities, like immigration and housing and disability and family law, but we also are able to use our very specific commercial expertise for the public interest. The second trend that I wanted to talk about before I hand it over to Cary is the professionalization of pro bono. And it's one thing that you can either be personally excited about that, and I would be thrilled if another Northwestern grad followed in my footsteps. As I mentioned, I had no idea that I would end up becoming a pro bono partner at a firm. That was certainly not a career path that anyone had done back then. But it is something that, as you saw that curve of law firms growing their pro bono practices, you saw law firms realizing that they had to take pro bono seriously as a practice group within their firm. Because at the end of the day, you can decide to do pro bono well or not well, just like we decide to do lots of things in our firm well. And so, so law firms have decided to professionalize the role of pro bono. As Maureen mentioned, I've been the president of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel, which are people who are more or less full-time running law firm pro bono programs around the world. And we now have more than 280 members. So a profession that was virtually unknown when I graduated law school in 1994 has more than 280 people who are now working in it. And so that should be something, as you think about a law firm you might want to go to, that's one indication of a law firm that takes its pro bono commitment and its pro bono practice very seriously. So Cary, let me turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about, from your perspective, the legal needs before the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And really quickly, that's a really exciting trend. I think even since I was in law school, the degree of commitment that we've seen from law firms such as yours to jump in and make this a really serious part of their practice is encouraging, and it's an exciting trend to see. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done, but I'm going to start off with some background on the work that the Bluhm Legal Clinic does. I'm sure that as alumni, most of you are familiar with what the basics of the Bluhm Legal Clinic offers, but just as a quick review, the clinic, I think one way to think of it is a public interest law firm. Another way to think of it as is kind of like a pro bono opportunity for students. It kind of checks a lot of the same boxes. Nobody's forcing you to do clinic work, but it's an opportunity that's out there for you. And there's some really important opportunities ranging from, appellate advocacy to working in poverty law to international human rights, and of course, the wrongful convictions work that the clinic does. And I hope that the law students who are a part of the clinic today and are getting a great experience out of that are able to kind of carry that tradition forward post graduation and continue to maintain that as a part of their practice. So the work that I do at the clinic is largely revolving around kind of different environmental issues, as I'm the fellow at the Environmental Advocacy Center there. I work in a number of different areas, ranging from climate change advocacy to environmental justice, which, if you're not familiar, is kind of the intersection between public health, environmental protection, and civil rights and anti-discrimination work. A lot of communities around the country are experiencing a much higher portion of environmental burdens from exposure to air pollution or toxic waste, and very often that is very strongly correlated or caused by discrimination on the basis of race or income in our society. And the EAC, where I work, does a lot of our projects is focused on protecting the rights and defending the health of people who live in those communities. And so the Bluhm Clinic offers this opportunity for students, but what people ask me a lot of the time is, okay, so I've graduated law school and I'm looking for ways to reincorporate public interest work into my career. How do I go about doing that? The good news is that there's actually a lot of different ways you can go about doing it. Certainly if your firm has a pro bono practice that you can work with, that's probably step one for most people. But if you're looking for ways to connect with an individual, first of all, there's a lot of organizations that are dedicated to doing that specifically. And I'm going to share a couple of these options in the chat here, so you're welcome to click these links and save them for later. One of the first places that I would recommend checking is either your local bar association or your state bar association. A lot of these organizations have web pages that are designed for the purpose of collecting and helping lawyers to find opportunities that meet their interests and skill sets. So that's one great place to start. Another is that there are a handful of nonprofits that are really designed for the exclusive purpose of helping lawyers connect with organizations and individuals who need their help on a volunteer basis. One of the organizations that I've worked with pretty regularly over the course of the last year or two is We the Action, which it's a really impressive organization. They've gotten over 230,000 hours of pro bono service coordinated between volunteer lawyers and clients, ranging from the ACLU to an individual veteran who needs help getting disability benefits, and that's been a really cool thing to play a small part of. But then finally, in terms of finding pro bono opportunities for yourself, keep your ears open, because once you get in this space and once people kind of know that you're the type of attorney who's looking for ways to help others or get involved with this space, more often than not, these are opportunities that snowball. You'll find one area and the same people you worked with reach out to you about help for another. If it works for you, that's a great way to help, even when people haven't necessarily reached out to you yet. If you're comfortable saying, hey, it looks like I can lend a hand with this, let's talk about what that may look like. It's a great way to get involved. And on that topic, one of the biggest things that I hear from attorneys who are kind of doing this work on their own and they don't have someone to guide them through it is, well, what if it doesn't match my skill set? Or what if I don't have the time to do it? And before I get into the specifics on that, one thing that I want to share is that as lawyers, as Northwestern graduates, for almost any matter, you're going to be better positioned to help someone with something than a non-lawyer would be. And there are exceptions to that, certainly, but as a general rule, you've got a skill set, and even if something is a new matter for you, you may be able to figure out how to do it, and it's worth spending some time to figure out if it's kind of within your ballpark. But more importantly than that as well, for a lot of the organizations that you can connect with, whether it's nonprofits who have lawyers on staff or policy advocates or whoever, there is often a lot of resources to help you get started in pro bono work, even in areas that you don't personally have experience with. So for example, We the Action will often tell you, here are the things that you may want to know beforehand. Here's the level of, here's some information that will help you to guide your decision around whether you feel capable of taking on that type of work. And then the second piece to that, of course, is availability and what your schedule allows. This can be hard to judge sometimes. I'll certainly grant that. And you don't want to ever commit to taking on a matter that is beyond your ability to actually see through. Obviously, we have an obligation when we commit to helping with something pro bono to actually seeing it through. But if you are working with, one of these bar associations or nonprofits that connects you, oftentimes they will give you estimates for about how much time it'll take you to actually do this work. And second of all, very frequently doing a little bit of additional initial research in the subject area will help you to gauge this for yourself and kind of, get the ball rolling and make some estimates before you make a full commitment on what you want to do. So really, I would say, when I took swimming lessons as a kid, one of the first things that the coach did is he said, "All right, you got to go jump in the deep end, because that's that's the scary part. Once that's over with, you'll be able to do anything." And I think that's a lot of the way that doing certain pro bono work is. You got to just don't commit to something you know you can't do, but move outside your comfort zone and ask others for help, and there's a good chance you'll be just fine. So that's a bit about kind of, what pro bono opportunities, traditionally exist and where to find the resources and, how to get involved. I want to talk a little bit now about, what the pandemic has done and the place that leaves us, both in terms of needs as well as in terms of what it looks like for lawyers to get involved going forward and still as we're in the pandemic at this point. And I'll start that with, I think, a bit of sobering news. One of the reports that I try to read on a regular basis when it comes out is a report that the Gates Foundation puts together called the Goalkeepers Report, that looks at different metrics around global health and well-being. And I don't think it's a surprise to anybody the pandemic has been bad, but it's been bad for more than just health reasons. Extreme poverty has increased 7% globally. Standard vaccinations for children are at their lowest level since 1990 levels. And of course, the economic damage has been really significant. And what I think is most concerning about that is that it has not been an equal distribution of struggle. Inequality has been exacerbated. In the United States, the portion of Black and Latino people who say they cannot pay their rent is currently twice that of what white Americans is right now. And that's a struggle that has really deep systemic roots. And it's also something that lawyers can do something about. And one other example, and I think Steve is probably going to talk about this a bit, is very unfortunately, there has been an increase in domestic violence, and therefore there is an increased need for assistance in that area as well. So, from a legal perspective and asking yourself, what can you do in pro bono to address some of these critical, urgent matters? There are a few areas that I decided to focus on. One of which is helping incarcerated people who are vulnerable because of medical conditions or age or other reasons to exposure during the pandemic. And using websites like We the Action, as well as, kind of just connections that I found that snowballed from that. There were a few areas that I got involved with. One of which was working with the Southern Poverty Law Center to try to get immigrants who were detained in ICE certified in a class that showed that they were at a higher risk because of medical conditions for complications from COVID-19, and working to get them either released or given special accommodations to mitigate their degree of risk from exposure. One of the other projects that I worked on was helping to petition Governor Pritzker for clemency or commutation sentences in Illinois for people who, again, had conditions that made them at a higher risk. One of those projects was involving people who were elderly veterans who, of course, because of their age and often because of other medical conditions, were at a higher risk. And these were both opportunities that I'd never worked in this space before, but they were nonprofits out there that were asking for help and, were offering either kind of baseline, here's what you need to get started, or, giving you just generic instructions on what to do. And it made the work possible. So that was, I'll share a little bit about, results from that in a bit, but that was those are some really special projects to be a part of. And, I hope that we helped people, but I also really, it's good to feel that you as an individual are making a difference in some of these places as well. And we've seen a huge increase too. The attention for lawyers who are looking for ways to get involved in this has really jumped. The websites that organize these things, as well as lawyers that I've talked to who are responsible for kind of connecting people with these opportunities, have said that in a large way, the legal profession has stepped up to this challenge and found ways to really help. And I think that we certainly still have room to grow in that department. And I hope that everybody on this call kind of takes this and looks for ways to get involved individually. But it's been exciting to be part of a profession that has taken some action and tried to do something positive here. So I'll stop there for now. Steve, I think I'll turn it over to you if you're good to talk.
Sure. Yeah. So, and I think that was a perfect segue of what you said earlier about how lawyers kind of keep their eyes and ears open and look for opportunities. And I find that often that's where some of the best pro bono projects come from, is the attitude of the best lawyers thinking, hey, I can help here, right? Seeing a problem and thinking, I think there's a legal solution and we can help. And that really is the story of what happened when the pandemic hit. One of the great joys of leading a pro bono practice is that we get to be involved in really the issues of the day, and not because of something inherent in ourselves, but because of what our lawyers want to do, right? So when the pandemic hits, the first emails I get are from my colleagues saying, what can I do to help? As you might imagine, today I'm receiving emails. What are we doing in Texas? How can we help the people in Texas? Right now, they're not legal issues to deal with in Texas, but there will be FEMA and other types of recovery issues. But when the pandemic hit, we got that exact same kind of response. Interestingly, it was the pandemic, of course, as you all know, is very different than any other natural disaster we've dealt with in our lifetimes. When we worked on Katrina or Superstorm Sandy or many of the other things, we were removed from it. Here, we were all affected by it. So the first thing we did, our first response was, let's make sure that our clients who we already are working with know that we are safe and secure, that we can continue helping them, and that we will. But very quickly, new needs from the pandemic came up. For example, many nonprofits needed help with counseling on Paycheck Protection Program loans, PPP loans. Employment issues became particularly important. We ran for the National Legal Aid and Defender Association, which is essentially the umbrella organization of all the legal aid agencies and all the public defenders in the United States. We ran a webinar to teach them all the different issues that they should be paying attention to as basically legal providers. So as you think, they are basically public law firms. So using what we had learned internally as a firm and sharing with them what they could do. Other firms set up unemployment programs to help people file unemployment insurance claims. Thankfully, so far, there have not been a lot of need for housing, but the eviction moratoria, many of them are lifting, and we still did need to help during the pandemic with conditions cases. So there was lots of that. And then we learned new modes of representation in this visual world. Interestingly, for example, we started to do clinics by video or by phone, where before we would do them in person. So when you think about what I'm talking about in a clinic, is kind of what we call an advice and referral clinic, where we would send lawyers down for, let's take, for example, the Dallas Volunteer Attorney Project. We would send lawyers down to the DVAP offices. They would sit there, wait for people to come in. People would wander in, ask them their questions. They would give them quick answers, tell them where they could find additional resources. In the 2 years before the pandemic hit, we participated in the clinic, but really maybe 25 people in our Dallas office over a 2-year period participated in it. The first clinic we did after the pandemic hit, we had 25 people volunteer in that first clinic, in part because we had a better mode of doing it. The clients could call in on the phone. Our lawyers could answer the phone and give them the answers without having to leave their desks. And it's not that our lawyers are lazy or don't want to do it, but as you imagine, even walking the few blocks and thinking, okay, now I've got to shut down my computer, I got to shut down for the day, kind of leave and do that. And for the clients, frankly, and being more client focused on this, the clients had to find a way to get to downtown Dallas, had to, wherever they were coming from, had to spend hours doing it. So those are things I hope we take forward. And one of the most striking examples that I've heard from my friends in the legal aid community has been the impact on domestic violence victims. Um, Mainly, domestic violence hearings are now being held by video, which means that the survivors do not have to go to court and be in the same room as the abusers. And that has really, in a lot of ways, leveled the playing field. And not to make light of a serious matter, but I did have to chuckle a bit that one of the tactics many abusers use when they go to court to defend against a protective order is to engage in some sort of physical or facial intimidation of of their um, their spouse or their partner. And apparently, what my friends in the DV community have told me is that the 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 abusers didn't learn that they were really that on Zoom everybody can see every facial expression you make, and so the intimidation doesn't quite it doesn't not only doesn't work the same way, but it also because you're not physically proximate, but also plays very badly because the judge sees everything that you're doing. And so I think we've seen some things that we really want to carry forward to kind of end this piece on a positive message that I think we are going to have a more accessible justice system. I don't want to be overly optimistic about it. We still have a long way to go to have an accessible justice system. As many of you probably know, about 80% of the legal needs of the poor go unmet every year. But there are ways we can do this better. My colleagues in New York, for example, have talked about now in housing court, the clients don't have to come and sit around for a whole half day or even a full day to wait for a status conference. Unfortunately, in some courts, um, the individuals seeking justice end up sitting more than they do actually speaking or in their hearings. And now if we can actually set up hearings where people have a time definite to log in to either by phone or by video, we can make access to justice much more possible for many more people. And so, Cary, let me turn it over to you. And so, what do you think this means for 2021 and going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And that's a really interesting observation around how the use of technology in the pandemic may make access to justice easier for a lot of people. I think, lawyers are going to continue to play an important role in that, but even just helping people who need assistance to find the time to go and advocate for themselves, I think is going to make a big difference going forward. But in terms of what I hope we can continue from this year and after the pandemic, one of the big benefits that I got out of doing a lot of pro bono experience was I learned that people really want to help out and be a part of it, in the legal community when they find out that you're doing this work. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a fellow at the Bluhm Clinic, and the work that I do professionally there is environmental justice and climate focused. But I've taken on some projects in different areas, and law students are very often, excited to hear about different areas and want to be a part of it. And so, if you have good relationships with either law students or other attorneys who want to, play a minor role and, help with a research question or something along those lines, obviously there are some confidentiality issues you'll have to figure out independently, but as a general matter, they can offer a great resource. They're generally very excited to be a part of that type of work. And oftentimes they can really expand the ability of the work that you can do as a nonprofit lawyer or as working at a law firm. For their benefit as well, in terms of working with law students, this looks great in a resume. And it's something that obviously we're doing this for the greater good, but there are certainly professional benefits to be gained. And if you have relationships, with either younger attorneys or law students who want to be a part of this work, it can be a great opportunity to help them advance their career as well. And in fact, one of the projects that I mentioned earlier on this call was working with the Illinois Prison Project to try to represent people in their clemency petitions before the Illinois Prisoner Review Board, and then ultimately before Governor Pritzker, as far as requesting sentence commutation or clemency. And I got involved with that work because the Illinois Prison Project had reached out to the Bluhm Clinic to ask if any of the clinic attorneys would be willing to work with law students or help them because of a huge excess of demand for people who wanted assistance during the pandemic, because they were concerned. And very unfortunately, prisons are high population density and therefore at a high risk of potential transmission for the virus. And there's been a lot of bad news during this pandemic, but I'm happy to say that one of the good pieces of news is that working with two Northwestern law students in that process, I don't know if anybody knows them, but Bridget Carmichael and Caroline McHugh, we were actually able to successfully petition Governor Pritzker and have a man released who'd been incarcerated for over 30 years for a crime that by definition he did not commit, and he's now safe and home with his family. And I'll share some information about that in the chat there if anybody wants to read more about it. But this was an awesome opportunity for students. I think it was one of the most incredible things I've ever been a part of. I don't think I'm ever going to have a conversation again where I call someone's daughter and say, are you sitting down because your father's coming home for Christmas for the first time in 3 decades. But that was something really special to be a part of, and I was happy to be able to do that with the assistance of some really awesome law students in that. And then I think that I'm really hoping other lawyers who've jumped into this and been a part of this pandemic relief continue to be a part of it going forward as well.
So I would just end there with kind of a short note on kind of keeping the best of what we've learned. I do want to note, though, that I still can't get used to the name Governor Pritzker. JB was a year ahead of me in law school, and I'm glad he finally made something of himself. But in all seriousness, the important lessons to come from the pandemic are figuring out not just how do we go back to normal, because I think normal was not what we want to go back to in a lot of ways, especially for people that cannot access justice. And so we want to take what we've learned during the pandemic, the walls we've broken down, the ways that we have found to accomplish our work more efficiently and more effectively and reach across boundaries. And so I say that to you who are both coming into the profession and in the profession already, that there are lots of ways that we can collaborate better together. For example, those of us who have experience working in areas like immigration, but have a hard time getting to, say, an immigration detention center in Georgia, hopefully we'll be able to collaborate better with our colleagues who are representing those immigrants, or even represent them remotely. There are, I think, many opportunities for us to make sure that the systems of government as well work better, that we aren't setting up artificial barriers, but at the same time, we're paying very close attention to what our clients need. Even the most basic things, like thinking about inviting a client to come into your downtown office, where we thought before that was really necessary. The client may still want to do that, and the client should absolutely be able to do that when it's safe to do so. But the client also may have to take 2-hour bus ride just to get across town, and may not be able to afford either the time or the expense of doing that. And so we should make sure that we are setting up the kinds of facilities to allow them to do that. And I think in some ways, I think as law firms, how some of our money gets misdirected. We are more likely to send a lawyer out to travel somewhere than we are, for example, to send a client a burner phone they can use for video, right? But that's silly. Like, why should we not send the client the burner phone to do to be able to talk to us by video, or to attend a hearing by video, or lend them a laptop, whatever it takes. I think we all have a far better understanding now of how we can make access to justice real for many more people, and I'm very hopeful about that. So Maureen, do we have questions to answer?
This Steve and Cary, it looks like there was one question that came up that said, what unexpected institutional hurdles have you faced in directing an organization's resources to pro bono work?
Well, there are always hurdles. So if you're talking about institutional hurdles of a law firm, one of the interesting hurdles that we have seen and are really trying to break down is thinking about our law firms more holistically. Pro bono has often been thought of, and law firms are really bad at this too, about thinking about the only talent in the firm as the lawyer talent, because that's what we're selling, right? So it's understandable why lawyers think about the talent in the firm, at least as an from an external facing standpoint, as the lawyers, because again, that's what we're getting paid to do, is to sell those skills. But there's so many people with so many different skills. And so, for example, last year, my colleague Juanita Bright, who's a project manager in our firm and has come up through the firm and had virtually every role in IT and project management, helped the Mississippi Center for Justice set up an app for remote expungement clinics. So now people don't have to travel to the clinic to do expungements. Instead, they can, on their phone, scroll through. We set up a questionnaire, an automatic questionnaire, where they can tell whether they qualify for expungement. And if the answer is yes, they can take a picture of their documents on their phone and send them automatically to Mississippi Center for Justice, which can then help them draft an expungement petition. So that's just one example, and I think one where if you can overcome those barriers, and there are barriers there to all sorts of things, where we again don't think of our other professionals within the firm in exactly the same way. So that would be an institutional barrier that I think I've tapped into a little bit, but haven't nearly overcome as much. And I think as a profession, we can do a far better job of empowering other professionals to help our clients in both ways that are unique to them, but also thinking about how do we disaggregate some of the legal work to make sure that we're doing more work for our clients and giving more help to our pro bono clients. Cary?
Yeah, thanks, Steven. I think that the Bluhm Clinic is really lucky to be in a position where we're kind of set up for the purpose of taking this work on. So we don't have a lot of struggles in that space within our institution. Certainly, it's important to always check with management before taking on anything through the organization you work for. Of course, if for no other reason, for making sure that you're doing a conflicts check properly. But yeah, I think you hit on the important points, and that is probably more question in your box there.
Great. So we have another question from Jeff Wood that says, are there any specific organizations that provide training for pro bono attorneys? And in what areas of the law do they provide training?
I can start off, take a crack at that. So that's really going to depend on what type of work that you're interested in doing and how it is that you're connecting with the organizations that are setting you up with, the clients, or if they're the clients. But in my experience working through We the Action itself, that organization does not provide training for lawyers, but a lot of the organizations that use that website to advertise pro bono opportunities do provide some level of training. For example, a lot of the immigration work that I did to try to help individuals who were detained in ICE custody, who had medical conditions. There are a lot of formulaic elements to that work. There was model petitions. There were 1 or 2 hour trainings where we talk through kind of the process. And of course, a lot of the times, what these organizations will really need is attorneys who are willing to do a lot of the time intensive part, but they often have people on staff. You can ask questions if you're unsure about, one issue or another. So if you're figuring out whether you have the right skill set to get involved in this, what I would say is that never be afraid to reach out to an organization and say, I think I can do this, but I want to confirm before committing myself, and seeing what resources are available there.
So I put in the chat box probono.net, which has a lot of good materials on it as well, and acts kind of as an informal clearinghouse for some organizations. And so I do think there's a lot of opportunity out there to get good training. I think, Maureen, was there another question about how law students can get involved?
so it looks like there's, what role does a student play in helping with clinic work or working cases with you typically look like? Is it primarily research and information gathering, or can students get direct experience with clients?
It can definitely be both. And one of the examples that was, I think, some work that I truly could not have done without the assistance of law students involved the immigration space as well, because I was able to work with law students who spoke languages, including Russian and Spanish, that could translate for me. You know, my Spanish is not very good. I can introduce myself and say that I'm an abogado, but apart from that, that's as far as I can go. You know, in that circumstance, the way that it worked was I had the law students sign a confidentiality agreement saying, you know, you're going to help with this work and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And they were able to translate those conversations. But then also when we get off the phone, you know, you can have the conversation where it's like, okay, so we got the information, you want to take a first draft of this petition. You know, they can, you know, do that, and then you'll take a look and make any modifications that are necessary before submitting anything. But that's one space that's helpful. Individualized research questions can be great roles for students because they're oftentimes really adept and very, you know, very focused researchers who can answer you know, procedural questions or, you know, what is the case law in this area? And so if you can break things into kind of component parts for them, I find that's one of the best ways to be able to get them involved and work within a skill set that they feel comfortable. Because, you know, once you're a 2L or a 3L, you know how to look into different, you know, just generalized, you know, what is the status of this question, and put together a good memo on that. And oftentimes that's a really time intensive process that I don't necessarily have the capacity to do myself for certain types of pro bono work. Yeah.
Great. This one is specific to Steve. So Steve, could you comment on the role of the pro bono counsel acting as a catalyst and a coordinator of all attorneys' pro bono work as compared to doing your pro bono work yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So it is a big part of my job is actually not doing the work directly myself, but working to develop matters for my colleagues. And that comes in a couple of different flavors. Some of that is just what I call pro bono rainmaking, which is very much, it sounds funny because it sounds kind of like, well, you're giving away your legal services. How hard can it be to get the work? But what you want to do is get work that is really interesting and impactful to your clients. And so some of that is developing relationships with organizations like, for example, Immigration Equality in New York, which does LGBTQ asylum cases. And we developed a great relationship with them. Once they know that we really know the area, they're more likely to give us cases quickly and to give us high profile cases. And so part of it is building those relationships and that kind of experience. Some of it is just going out, like I mentioned Kip before, our largest pro bono client. That was a cold call that we made to the head of Kip and their general counsel saying, what do you think about having a law firm do pro bono work with you? We realized that it was an organization that would have very interesting legal needs that could really use our help. And that worked. And we've done about 25,000 hours of legal work with them over almost a 15-year period. On the other hand, just like rainmaking, there's things that don't work. There's a great charity called Mercy Corps that some of you may be familiar with. In any natural disaster, Mercy Corps is there helping people. I thought it would be a great relationship for us to have. We have offices all over the world, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work. Like, you know, it wasn't the right fit of practice groups and geography and whatever else. And so that's one of, I think, the luxuries of having a pro bono counsel at a firm is that you have someone who can actually go out and fail sometimes in getting those and succeed sometimes. And then within the firm, I think it is important to have a leader who is really focused on pro bono, which is the one reason when I was at Latham, I was doing it half-time. And I remember this expression I used to use. I used to call it my shower time. And I would think about, okay, how do I use my time in the shower in the morning? And what am I thinking about? And when I was doing both antitrust law and leading what was then the world's largest pro bono practice, I didn't have enough time in the shower or maybe enough hot water to actually be able to think about both, right? And so if you do have somebody who's full-time thinking about the pro bono practice, you're thinking strategically about it, you're thinking about some of the internal things. I saw there was a question there about one of the institutional hurdles, so I'll move to that question about billable hours. And that is a real significant hurdle. And one of the benefits of being at a larger firm is that you have more colleagues to help you out. So one of the things that we do to overcome that particular obstacle is make sure that we have probably more staffing than we need on a typical matter, knowing that somebody can be kind of dragged off onto something else. And that doesn't mean dragging somebody off the day before a hearing and not allowing them to do the hearing, but it does mean that instead of having one person responsible for all of a 100-hour matter, having two people responsible for it, even though that might take 120 hours total, but each of them is only going to do 60, and they can always be covering for each other. And frankly, it's more fun to work with somebody else. Most of the people think that. Maybe not tax lawyers and appellate lawyers, but most people like to work with somebody else.
I definitely second that. People love working on teams in these areas. Yeah.
Steve, it looks like there was a second part to that question that says, as a pioneer of law firm pro bono professionalism, what are the pathways for students or lawyers who want to follow in your footsteps?
So, I do get that question a fair amount. And one thing I say is, our ABCO members, the Association of Pro Bono Counsel members, we have about 280 members at about 140 law firms. So one of the things I like to say is you are more likely to become the chair of a law firm than of a AmLaw 200 law firm than the pro bono partner at a law firm. And actually only probably about 50 of those are partners at firms. But that said, I think one of the things is just be a really good lawyer. Like really like being a lawyer and be successful at that. That actually gives you a lot of leeway to do a lot of different things. Like you would be surprised at how much if you are valued as a lawyer at whatever organization you're in, whether it's a law firm, whether it's in-house, whether it's at a legal aid organization, if people value your legal skills and you as a lawyer, you can do a lot of other things. You get a lot of leeway to do other things. And so, for example, lawyers, there are lawyers, and one of my colleagues made partner the year he did like 1,200 pro bono hours. He was leading a matter where we represented U.S. Holocaust survivors who were trying to get justice from the French government, who owned the railroad that deported some of them individually, but some of their relatives to Nazi death camps during World War II. And he basically had this incredible strategy that ultimately ended up with congressional hearings and the French government coming to the State Department and asking to negotiate a bilateral treaty that would resolve the issue, and giving about $61 million to folks. But the reason Rafi was able to do that is because Rafi had proven himself as a great lawyer. And so that, to me, kind of that's the path, is once you've proven yourself to be a really good lawyer in whatever capacity it is, and people come into positions like mine, not just growing up at a law firm like I've done. Some of my colleagues, Ben Weinberg at Denton's there in Chicago, for example, he was at the Illinois Attorney General's office before he came. He had been an associate at Jenner & Block. Before that, there are other people, Harleen Katzman, who was a classmate of mine at Brandeis and then went on, I can't remember where she got her law degree, but she was at Columbia University running there, basically was the Maureen of Columbia University. And she then went on to Simpson Thacher to lead their pro bono practice. So there are many different paths, but what is common in those paths is actually being successful kind of in something else, but always obviously making time to do pro bono work.
Well, Steve and Cary, that was fantastic, and Maureen as well. So I just want to give you guys a really big warm thank you. This was such a wonderful presentation. I think we're at our stopping time, so I'll let everybody go. But thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.